Okay, so we're here today again with Peyton Smith from over at the Fourth Radical YouTube channel, and we're going to talk more politics. Today, we're looking specifically at the bailouts and how this works out politically. So I'm kind of going to set the stage here, and then we're going to kick it off into a conversation and go from there. So I guess one of the things that really struck me with the bailouts was really how one-sided everything seems to be. It really seems like the Republicans got a lot of what they wanted, and the Democrats, I think it could be argued, maybe got little to nothing. I mean, you could say, well, they got a few things, but you kind of have to wonder if those things would have been in the bailout anyways if the Democrats hadn't been fighting for them. So a few things. No layoffs for the entire duration of the crisis. We didn't get that. That was watered down significantly. $15 minimum wage, worker board representation for companies who take money, equity stake in exchange for funds of companies who take the money, postal voting, voting safeguards, renewable energy funding. These are all things that the Democrats started off by saying were really important, but basically got none of those things, not in any kind of meaningful way. And it makes me wonder, are the Democrats even able to win things? I mean, we've seen since the Trump presidency, fail, right? Fail with the Mueller report, which really, in my opinion, the Mueller report should have been a slam dunk, but they failed at that one, failed at impeachment. That didn't go well. So even, it's kind of like the Democrats are the team that's up by 20 going into the fourth quarter and then still manage to lose everything because we have these situations where they have power and they are so afraid to use it. And we saw I think there was clips of AOC and Bernie Sanders speaking up and saying, maybe this isn't such a good idea, this bailout. But for the most part, the Democrats pretty much got in line and signed on with all of these things that many of us are now complaining about in the bailout. And they went right along with it. So it's like, well, who's to blame for this bad bailout? It seems like everyone really has some blame to share there. So I'm interested in your ideas on that.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we saw coming out of this fund was, of course, that it was a slush fund, and the narrowness of the debate was unbelievable, right? The entire debate was, do we want oversight over the slush fund, and what's that oversight going to look like? It wasn't actually a debate trying to restructure the economy itself, because it seemed like, when you look at how this pandemic, how this crisis was panning out, how it was going around, it was like, well, look, we actually need to restructure a whole lot to do with this entire company or the entire economy. Instead, we were just debating about what we were going to do for the people who actually got the money in the first case. Maybe we should have looked beyond that originally. And in all honesty, I mean, you lay out those things that the Democrats were saying that they wanted. A lot of those things, they haven't really pushed for. And we're seeing right now, as we look forward towards the second bailout, many of these things that they said they were pushing for the first time, and that they kind of say they're pushing for now, it's not clear that they even really are pushing for those things. It seems like a few Democrats were like, I would like this, but then did leadership actually push for it? I don't know that we're seeing that. So it's almost like, it's one of those things where you'd like to say, oh, Democrats pushed for this thing, but it's debatable because Democrats are just like a group of different people. So if you say, okay, well, one Democrat, in Congress that they wanted this, can you really say that that was something that the Democrats were fighting for?
Right. And then going forward, I mean, you're not really in the position of power that you were, whatever it was, a couple weeks ago, where the Republicans had a lot of things that they wanted, in order to bail out companies and give a lot of money to questionable sources. It seems like they should have been able to leverage a lot more from that when the Republicans wanted something. But even as McConnell has come out and said, maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if the Republicans didn't have any more bailout stuff because they've kind of got what they wanted. So it seems to me extremely doubtful that they'll be willing to bend in the future because they, look how obstructionist they were able to be during the 8 years of Obama, right? And they just learned that it works. They learned that this obstruction is how they succeed. And if you look at a lot of their ideas, that's kind of what they want. They want to obstruct government. They want to obstruct spending. So they can just pause and say, well, we don't really need anything else that much more. So we're not interested in what the things that I listed out earlier. So we'll see. It seems like they're bargaining from a position of vast weakness compared to what they could have been a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and I mean, Mitch McConnell, talking about how, at least initially saying, oh, well, it wouldn't be a terrible idea if we just, didn't bail out the states. We just let the states go bankrupt. And so now what we're having as a debate, because Mitch McConnell started the debate over on that just insane position. Right now, the Democrats are set, like, we end up in this unbelievably weird compromise where, Ted Cruz sounds like the rational, reasonable person when he's saying that the only money that should come out, or excuse me, the only way in which we're going to be bailing out the states is if the money is going specifically and explicitly to coronavirus related stuff. And when you hear that stuff, it to the average person, like, well, yeah, of course, we're not going to try to bail out, a state that already had a failing budget, without realizing that many of these states restructured their budget already to handle the pandemic. One example, this isn't an example from a state, but in my county, in Fairfax County, one of the things that they did, they were going to be raising spending for education nearly $85 million for our, Fairfax County public school systems. That's being cut back. And so the idea that, we're going to bail out state and local governments, but it's only going to go to specific coronavirus related stuff, well, that just doesn't take into account the very fact that all of these programs that we were going to have were already cut back because of the coronavirus. Right. So it seems like, so Democrats are able to come away thinking like, oh yeah, I really got them. I really want them. We're getting bailouts for states, but for states and localities. But are you really? You're not. Anyway.
Yeah, and the amount of money that was in the bailouts to go to states, I mean, it's just a tiny fraction of what actually is going to be needed to do any kind of meaningful good. And some of these other ideas, I mean, they got in there that Trump can't benefit from the bailouts, which is good, but that's not really, I mean, it's not something that really is going to help people who are out of work right now.
What did you see the real stance the Democrats made? Chuck Schumer said he's not going to be letting Trump put his name on the next stimulus checks. Come on, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Again, sure, it's a little bit of propaganda that people get their checks and they see Trump's name, but this is not the hill to die on when people need food and money.
Right. Like, I would be perfectly willing to trade. Like let that be your negotiating chip. Be like, well, I'll let you put your name on the bailout check if you bail out X, Y, if you're right. Like, yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But of course,
and
because then
go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, then the Democrats can't do that because then the press narrative will be like, oh, Democrats just roll over and let Donald Trump write his names on the checks. Just like, but at the end of the day, who cares? Who cares? We're talking about 35% of families not having enough food in their house. So, at the end of the day, if Donald Trump gets his names on the check, do I want to see Donald Trump's name on my check? No. But at the end of the day, if he puts his name on the check, if people are getting food, I don't really care.
Right. Yeah. And it seems like the real negotiation position would have been getting more for people, right? Because you go, well, they were able to get a certain amount of money for people, but you have to look at it and go, could the Republicans really have passed a bill that had any less? Right. In their early bargaining stance that they went with had, the poorest people getting the absolute lowest amount of money. So, it was sort of a very regressive system. And then, could Trump really have done that? 6 months or 7 months out from an election and given people who are going to be voting absolutely nothing? I don't think he could have done that. So it kind of seems like the Democrats bargained their way up to what was probably going to be in the bill anyways.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, when it comes to some of this stuff right now where, what's Mitch McConnell trying to do with, oh, that's right. With the infrastructure, he's blocking Donald Trump when it comes to the infrastructure investment because Donald Trump is actually at least claiming that he's interested in some kind of infrastructure investment. And then over here, we've got Mitch McConnell saying, oh, there's a quote in, I believe it was the Washington Post saying, oh, we're going to box the White House in because they're not going to be allowed to do this. So the one productive thing that's coming out of this debate is, well, maybe we'll have an infrastructure bill that will allow people to get jobs. It's like, okay, that's like, all right, like now we're talking about possibly a solution. And Mitch McConnell's like, absolutely not, can't do that. That's the thing that, we got to box them in. We can't and he lumped in that quote, we've got to, I cut off the quote early. We've got to box the White House and the Democrats in, lumping in the White House with the Democrats, which, by the way, if Fox News, if Tucker Carlson decided to go on and rant about how Mitch McConnell's going against Donald Trump, I guarantee you it would change like this overnight. Because if Donald Trump started actually attacking Mitch McConnell, well, first of all, Mitch McConnell's clearly the one with the power. But second of all, there actually would be some real movement if that happened. But
And I think this is a good example for why history is so important, because we've literally run this experiment in this country where we had huge unemployment. And one of the things we did to take care of people was a big infrastructure bill to put people back to work. The United States gained a bunch of great infrastructure, which we then let decay for decades and decades. But, it put people to work. People were able to, kind of get back on their feet. And then we were left with a lot of great stuff in this country. And it seems like we could look at that and go, it worked once. Why don't we try it again? Where, we put some money into infrastructure. Not only will we gain the infrastructure, but it will help people out because they'll have a job then. And then you have people, some of the most powerful people in government fighting against this and saying, no, absolutely not.
Yeah. And to be slightly fair here, it did take like 4 years of the Great Depression before we started seeing that stuff, before that kind of uprising did occur. There was a long time there where people weren't really doing anything, politicians weren't really doing anything, but you'd think maybe, just maybe, we could do it quicker than 4 years this time around.
Yeah, it's that learning from your mistakes, right? You learn from your past, and then you're ready to make those decisions quicker, hopefully, the next time, you'd hope.
By the way, though, even in the Great Depression, it was a much slower, right? Like it got to 25% unemployment, but it was a much slower rise as opposed to right now where literally we hit 15% unemployment in basically a month. We've never seen anything like this. It's unbelievable. And then to see Nancy Pelosi, moving to the next bailout package that we're likely to see, Nancy Pelosi is pushing for, in the current House Democrat bill, supports the movement to bail out corporate lobbyists. Because we saw corporate lobbyists and political consultant groups, pushing because they wanted a bailout last time around. And of course, though, what's their argument? They say, oh, well, you actually need us to write laws and write bills. We're essential services to providing information to legislators. And the sad part is kind of true.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be, I was kind of thinking about this last night. It would be really interesting if instead of having, this was a good point you made about how the Democrats are sort of, they're a group, but they're all individual and different people. But it would be interesting if that group was more aligned towards the Bernie Sanders and the AOCs versus the Nancy Pelosi's. Like, what could have been possible in a bailout? What could we have possibly seen if there was that more progressive agenda? Because it really seems like right now you can make the case that all the things that Bernie Sanders was fighting for in his, when he was campaigning, are things that, first of all, the current situation would have hurt a whole lot less, and we would be much more prepared to deal with it if we had had those in place, like we're seeing in Europe, where, it's a little easier for them because people already have health care in these countries, right? You don't have whatever we're at now, 28 million new people who are just newly unemployed, many of which now don't have much options for getting health care.
Yeah, and speaking of Bernie Sanders, I think that there's like a great opportunity right now to talk a little bit about Joe Biden's strategy right now, which is basically duck and cover and don't really present an alternative path, because he's explicitly saying, well, the alternative position, the alternative path should be laid out for Congress, that they should be the ones who are presenting the alternative vision for the Democrats. But how about we actually set our standards? Like, what's the standard? Look, Bernie Sanders actually did have like a set of things that we could do to respond to this coronavirus stuff. Joe Biden hasn't done that. And so there isn't like a standard bearer, a standard mark to try to reach, and I think that that's one of the real weaknesses that we're seeing right now. And so the Democrat response ends up basically just being, a pre-negotiated set where, you have all these, maybe swing districts and, blue dog Democrats who are more so, worried about losing to Republicans possibly. And then they're like, well, I can't go that far. I can't go that far. And so then the Democratic response is pre-negotiated. And I get worried about that. I feel like, yeah, you are absolutely right to say that Democrats are not pushing for a substantive set of agenda, not realizing, by the way, that like these, these like blue dog Democrats, however you want to say that, I feel uncomfortable saying that phrase, blue dog Democrats, but, however you want to say it, like, if the Democrats actually pushed for like a far left wing agenda, it's not like that thing would actually get through. So right. like realistically, it's probably not. Mitch McConnell would block it, but you'd come to a better compromise position if you actually started from a more extreme position. It was just Mitch McConnell's doing, right? Like playing hardball doesn't necessarily mean pre-compromising your beliefs. It seems like playing hardball just means, oh, I have actual principles, I have actual left-wing beliefs, and then standing for those values and fighting for them as much as you can.
Yeah, and your point about Biden is well taken, because it seems like I'm just confused why people around him are making the choices they are, unless there's some kind of serious problem they're trying to keep hidden, because it seems like this is the perfect opportunity to stand up and start putting out ideas there, since he kind of seems like he's going to be the leader for a while of the Democratic Party. Start putting out ideas right there and show us you're a leader. Show us that you can lead. I mean, what he's showing us is, if he gets elected, he's just going to turtle down and leave it for everyone else to kind of run things while he just sort of waits out 4 years. I mean, what is he doing?
Exactly. I mean, he doesn't seem like a leader. He doesn't feel like a leader. I mean, he says that he literally says that he's going to be a transitional president to bring in the Pete Buttigieg's of the world. I mean, an unbelievable quote. Like, first of all, do we really want that? But second of all, yeah. I mean, it's just like that literally just shows you that he's not actually like the leader. And so when people like if you manage to like the people who are convinced and decide to go vote for him, a lot of them are willing to admit that, oh, well, I'm not really voting for Joe Biden. I'm just voting against Donald Trump. How's that going to work out for you?
Yeah. Yeah. And then I look at things like the post office, and I wonder, like how far I keep going back to this. The Republicans seem so good at winning. I mean, if the United States Postal Service goes down, a lot of who's going to be hurt is people in rural areas who are the Republican base. And it seems like the Republicans have learned they can even turn on their own, and they're not going to necessarily lose support. And because what is it? I think there's a number of polls, but depending on what poll you look at, somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of the people in this country support the post office getting a bailout and being able to be, keep going so that people are working. And there seems to be this decades-old attack on the post office.
Like, who doesn't? Like, if you set out a poll, it's like, do you support protecting the post office? Like, I mean,
right.
Everyone would be like, oh, yeah, of course I support that. But somehow that kind of rhetoric is able to fly around, and people don't really. It's this weird way in which the ideologies of the average person is so set to a certain baseline, right? They're so used to thinking about the world in this very, constricted way that you're able to make rhetoric like that, and it seems perfectly fine. Although, in the case of Republicans and stopping the post office bailout, I should say I think there might be some developments on that, because there's a number of companies, specifically retail companies, who are lobbying now and pushing Congress to bail out the post office, because they think that would be a benefit to them, because of course, then they need socialism, right? But my point though is that politicians tend to listen to money, so we'll have to see. Right. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, and it just blows me away, because I still have relatives that live in areas where you can't really get reliable internet, right? So it's one of your connections to the outside world is mail, that you can have mail showing up. I mean, it's not just a convenience issue, and it's weird. Some of this seems to trace back to, I mean, the Republicans have been trying to destroy it for a while, but Trump has this thing against Amazon where he's really got it in for Bezos, and he doesn't want them to be able to use the post office. And it's just so bizarre that they push things so hard that now the Democrats have to fight and use as a bargaining chip something that 90% of Americans want.
Right. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I sometimes wonder, what would happen if the Democrats just were well, we're not negotiating on that point, right? And literally just basically ignored criticisms of those points, and then we're just saying this is what we're fighting on, and list actual ideas like universal health care or something like that.
Yeah.
I wonder if those kinds of what that would mean is, would the post office bailout just not happen, or would that mean that I don't know. I'm not really sure how that would play out.
Yeah, because the other side does it. I mean, Mitch McConnell's done it for years, and I guess Steve Mnuchin was part of these negotiations where he just said, nope, that's a no-go. We're not doing this. So the other side is willing to say, hey, here's a line, and we're not going past that. And it seems like the Democrats are just always willing to go stand up next to that line and say, okay, well, I guess you can have your way there.
The thing that I'm really worried about is the Democrats specific and explicit attempt to try to court Republicans into the party in light of Donald Trump. You know, I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about more recently, so I'm actually reading right now Thomas Piketty's new book, Capital and Ideology, and one of the arguments that he makes in there is how he thinks that like basically the center left and center right is going to unite as a result of polarization against sort of, you know, the two sides. I mean, you could criticize the way in which he's conceiving of the left and right dimension, but regardless, what it sort of spurred in me, the thought that I sort of thought of is how Pete Buttigieg is explicitly and specifically appealing to the once future Republicans. That's one of the talking point lines that he uses all the time. How, you know, oh well, I'm talking to the, you know, the future the future former Republicans. That's how he says it. And he says things like, oh, I'm looking forward to, you know, bringing those people into the party, how we need a big tent party. Because one of the things that I was always wondering about during the primaries was, why is it the case that Pete Buttigieg isn't more so to the, like, why is he specifically playing into that lane of politics? Because that seems to be a risky bet for him, because he's a younger guy, right? And he definitely is ambitious, right? Like, he's definitely someone who wants to seek power. And so he's making a very explicit and specific bet, which is that he's betting that the Democratic Party isn't going to go to the left, right? Like, like, initially when he first entered, he was going to the left. He was more so to the left. And then I think, you know, he saw an opportunity where he might be able to do well, and then, you know, immediately flipped. But initially he was running on Medicare for All, for instance. But then he immediately flipped, which makes me think that it's not only a short-term, like, as I've thought about it more, I don't think it's just a short-term gamble that he's making. Like, I actually think he's making a long-term gamble, which worries me all the more.
Yeah, and it's I guess when I think about that, instead of courting Republicans, it seems like you could just maybe try to get votes of people who are already Democrats. Like, we kind of talked about democracy last time. We need to get this democracy shored up and just get the Democrats able to vote and be represented. Seems to me like a pretty productive area to be trying to strengthen. How you do in elections is make sure that we have fair elections, make sure that Democrats can vote. I mean, Trump lost, and I know it's not, I'm not trying to do that line where we say, well, Trump really lost the election. He won the election. He did lose the popular vote by 3 million, but I could see this time, I could see him lose the popular vote by 6 million and still win the presidency, right? So we need.
Yeah.
It seems like democracy would be a good place to go after strengthening the Democratic vote, because then those votes would count.
Well, and the absolutely unbelievable thing, I know that we're maybe moving past bailouts at this point, but the unbelievable thing is that Republicans try to politicize the vote. So, you know, efforts and, you know, which, you know, I mean, political scientists have done phenomenal research in the past 10 or 15 years on ways that are effective and could, you know, legitimately increase voter turnout. And so Democrats have been trying to push those things into the, you know, like, these things can increase voter turnout. These things can, you know, increase the even in the, what is it? What would you say? Like, information, how informed voters are, right? Like, various different ideas that could increase how informed voters are, different ways that you could, you know, increase voter turnout that political scientists have been working on, you know, like, and so Democrats push these things in the public view, and then Republicans try to politicize it immediately. I mean, it's like,
yeah.
And
so let me try to bring this we'll stay on democracy, and let me bring it back to the bailouts, this idea with the oversight, where the Democrats actually worked hard to make sure there was going to be some kind of oversight into this bill, and then immediately once it goes through, Trump just figures out a workaround so that that oversight is not going to exist, which to me is still a major attack on democracy. When you can operate without oversight, then are you really serving the people?
Yeah, well, the ridiculous thing was that, I mean, they could have written it specifically into the bill how oversight was going to work. But the problem with that is, you know, a problem that I watch quite closely, which is that if you write too much regulation specifically into the bill, then politicians can be specifically culpable for errors, right? So if you write into the bill that so-and-so is going to be in charge of such and such, then you increase the likelihood of political error. So it actually, like, the incentives of politicians are reversed the way that, like isn't really where you want it to be, which is that like literally their incentive is to pass the bill, but then have as much like distance from the bill as possible.
Right.
And so what you do is you have the oversight be decided by the executive branch, because in the case, for instance, I honestly think that Nancy Pelosi thought that she was doing brilliant political maneuvering, because then she can go to her base and say that, look, we fought for, these provisions on these bailouts or oversights of the bailouts, but then they can also turn around and then completely blame the Republicans for undermining democracy. And it's true, right? Like it's like she's not lying when she says things like that. But it's also slightly misleading, because she actually had the possibility of like literally just removing the possibility of Donald Trump being able to do the thing that done, the obvious thing that he was obviously going to do, which he explicitly said he was going to do from the get-go. So
yeah. Well, that was a great conversation with Peyton Smith from over at the Fourth Radical YouTube channel. Go on over there and check out his videos. Thanks for being here, Peyton. Really appreciate it.